Hello and welcome to Anti-Natalism this week. I don't generally cover personal blogs or posts on forums, but sometimes there are exceptions and we have one this time. No One is Infrastructure is a blog by Noom, who is also the moderator of the biggest antinatalist rated group, r/antinatalism. The title may sound a little strange for a blog to be covered on antinatalist video, but it has relevance. No one in it means any sentient being who can feel, suffer, want, or fear. The word infrastructure means a support structure to someone else's project. The famous pyramid of capitalist system comes to mind. This is a cartoon from 1911 showing a hierarchy of layers supporting the one above. At the bottom are the common people and at the top are the rulers. Each layer acts as an infrastructure to the one above until we have rulers. The whole hierarchy acts as a support system for projects of these rulers, projects like a nation or economy and so on. But this is only one instance of what new means by infrastructure. There can be other projects like a family, a farm, even a movement, or just abstract future. And depending on the project, different types of beings are used as infrastructure. For example, other animals could be bred and used in a farm for the profit of the farmer, or babies are created to maintain family structure and continuation of lineage. These are examples where sentient beings are used as a means for a project, but that project is not meant for them. They are standing to support something which is not in their own interests. This standing is different than welfare or well being. It doesn't matter how well the people supporting a project are treated. The question is whether the project they are taking part in is for their benefit or not. A careful farm is still a farm. A benevolent state can still arrange subjects around purposes they did not choose. A family that treats a child as continuation of a lineage does not cease doing so merely by being loving. That's the difference between a cooperative project and a project that enslaves someone. The problem is not usefulness. The problem is being made for use. When a subject is organized as support for purposes not genuinely answerable to their own good and standing. For any such project, the precondition is those beings have to be made available somehow. In case of family, this is usually done by biological reproduction. In case of animal farms, this is done by breeding or artificial insemination and so on. To be born is to be made available to a world, available to hunger, grief, and death, to school, work, gendered expectations, borders, climate, political authority, and the habits of a species that often harms more than it understands, and eventually to the task of making sense of an existence one never requested. The argument here is not of consent. Whether someone could have consented to be born is irrelevant here. The main point is, was the action of procreation in the interest of the being who is being brought into existence? No one existed prior to that action, so it could not have been. This is why the question is not simply whether anyone consented to being created. No one could have. The deeper question is whether fiduciary justification, meaning justification of decision taken on behalf of someone else, can apply at all when the subject the relation would have to answer to is what the relation produces. In other words, the reason to employ a being into a project also becomes the reason to create that being altogether. So he asks the question, who is being made available to what and by whose authority? But creation of a being or bringing it into existence is in itself a separate action than recruiting it for some purpose. Before anyone can be made available for a project, can someone be made available to existence itself? Embodied, vulnerable, mortal, and exposed to a world already waiting for them through an act that could not first answer to them. So there are two questions. One is, can someone be created, that is made available, and then can they be used as a support for a project they were not interested in? Noom's blog is focused on the place where these two questions converge. One such place is institutional pronatalism, where children are thought of as a supply for the projects pronatalists are interested in. The concern here is institutional pronatalism, the conversion of birth into supply for systems. More children for the economy, more children for the nation, more children so that we do not disappear. In this form, pronatalism turns the child into a solution before the child can be a subject that is born. Hume recognizes that for a flourishing economy or a functioning society, children are needed. But can we fulfill that need by using children as a supply? The wrong here is not that institutions need people, they do, but that they convert that need into permission to produce them. A future child can appear as a gap in a forecast before appearing in the world, an empty classroom seat, a missing payroll contributor, a future renter, taxpayer, military recruit, elder care provider. Something is already expected of them. They have not yet taken a breath, and already the world has uses. Another institution where this happens even more literally is animal farms. The animal is bred into ownership, her existence planned as inventory, her reproduction managed, her family bonds permitted only where they serve production, her body is assigned a purpose: milk, eggs, flesh, offspring, genetic material, profit. Her death is priced into the model before she is born. The farm is pronatalism without romance, birth as supply. The scale becomes visible: no consent, no exit, total assignment, death built into the purpose of birth. Crucially, in both cases, that is the case of having children and the case of breeding animals in agriculture, the question of making a being available is shared. Procreation as such and breeding a sentient being into property are not the same wrong. They share the prior question of creating a vulnerable subject through an act that could not first answer to that subject. Once this barrier of availability is breached, different systems claim the being in different ways. A child is part of a family and already carries the lineage further. It names it. In most cases, family decides its religion, its ways of upbringing. The state decides its rationality and laws that it must abide by as a good citizen. The species puts the burden of continuation on the child. An animal who was bred is already assigned a purpose: to provide meat or milk or eggs or leather or entertainment, and so on. These are imposed by power or necessity. We create a being who is vulnerable and convert that vulnerability into consent. Once subject exists, the conversion of vulnerability into permission becomes the recurring move. The worker's need for rent is not consent to exploitation. The citizen's inability to escape governance is not consent to domination. The animal's captivity is not consent to use. A person's reproductive capacity is not consent to demographic duty. And also, this answers to "why don't you kill yourself" argument against antinatalism. Once we come into existence, going out is not easy and involves suffering. But this vulnerability can't be used as a consent to have been born. Hume also warns us against misuses of this argument. To be against creation of new children does not mean we don't have to care for existing ones, nor does it mean we don't have to respect people's reproductive choices, because any kind of coercion would again lead to the same thing, converting vulnerability into permission. This is why reproductive justice has to be a guardrail for any antinatalist politics. Bodily autonomy is non-negotiable. A moral objection to optional procreation gives no person movement or state authority over another person's reproductive body. A liberatory antinatalism must oppose forced birth and forced non-birth with equal seriousness. Otherwise, we risk of falling into eugenics or some kind of authoritarian population management. And force is not the only way to exploit vulnerabilities. There are soft pressures like societal shaming or selective discouragement and so on. In many parts of the world today, women are shamed for being infertile. If antinatalism becomes a norm, the reverse can happen. Those who have children might be seen with contempt, which is not something we should do, because an antinatalism that operates by stigma reproduces the structure it opposes. It makes reproductive subjects available to its project by other means than force. The decision to not have children or agreement to antinatalism cannot be forced, and so it has to come from within. The point is that no one should be commanded to reproduce, pressured to reproduce, prevented from reproducing, or made reproductively useful to someone else's project. Hume concludes that antinatalism is only part of the puzzle. Once the being comes into existence and is forced into some kind of project, the questions of how that person should behave and how should we treat that person remain open and in a different framework. Antinatalism disclosed the first assignment, being made available to existence through an act that could not first answer to the subject it would create. It did not give me the whole answer. answer, it gave me a question that becomes political wherever beings are made available for use. Who is being made to carry a world they did not choose? For those who would like to go in technical depth, Neum also provides formal statements like definitions of availability, infrastructuralization, standing, as well as normative principles and structural claims. I think I have read a very nice personal blog after a long time, so thanks Neum for writing this and hope you continue creating more. A news from Iran. The journal called Ethical Reflections is published by Zanjan University in Iran. One of its recent issues had an article on antinatalism, an evaluation of ethical arguments against procreation. The article was actually published in February, but it was not available till internet in Iran was being restored, and I could only access it this week, and that too intermittently. It is partly in English and partly in Persian, so I got it translated using AI. The article criticizes antinatalism on 5 aspects. One is critique of the argument from heavy responsibility of parenthood. That heavy responsibility is that of parents. Having children and raising them is not an easy task. There are practical difficulties like cost of education and nutrition and so on, and there are ethical ones too, like you have to take so many decisions on behalf of that child. Women face even more difficulties as they have to invest bodily in pregnancy, birth, breastfeeding, and in many societies with traditional gender roles, they also have to provide physical labor in raising children. So, the argument that the article claims is that motherhood and fatherhood are extremely difficult responsibilities and therefore it is better never to have children. But this can be balanced with meaning that parents get in their life. They would still enjoy the painful process of having and raising children. These are very personal and subjective aspects. Some people may like them, others won't enjoy as much. Therefore, this reason to not have children can't be applied universally, and hence this argument for antinatalism is not correct. Now, I have not seen a philosophical argument for antinatalism talking about difficulties for parents in raising a child. Maybe there is one and I missed the citation while translating, but this sounds more like a reason of child-free people to me. The next one is critique of disability argument. This is a special form of risk argument for antinatalism. Your child can end up with genetic disorders or with disability, and therefore you should not have children. The article argues that this is wrong because many disabled people have lives worth living, and postponing pregnancy results in a different individual, not a better version of the same child, which is non-identity problem. Moreover, stopping disabled children from coming into existence has ethical problems. The claim that society should contain fewer disabled individuals because they require more medical resources is also ethically unacceptable. From the view of disability rights activists, disabled people have a right to life as much as anyone else. One of the reasons is that disability is a social construct. If all of us needed wheelchairs to move, then none of our buildings would have had staircases. Ramps and lifts would have become the default norm all the time. Similarly, if majority of people had wings and could fly, then the remaining minority people with just 2 arms and legs would have become disabled in comparison to others. If a majority of us could see ultraviolet light, then the rest of us with the eyesight that we have today would have been treated as missing something. But this issue is already addressed by David Benatar in Better Never to Have Been. The criticism only works if antinatalists are opposed to procreation of only certain types of babies, which is not the case. Socially constructed disability makes some lives still worse, and we should certainly join disability rights advocates in seeking reasonable accommodation that would minimize or remove such disability. That would not be enough, however, to make any lives worth starting. As for the non-identity problem, Benatar explains that too in Better Never to Have Been. I won't go in details of the problem, but the objection here is that if you postpone pregnancy to avoid a disabled child being born, then you are altogether avoiding that child's existence. Disability is very much tied to the identity of that child. So you can't say that bringing this child is worse for this child rather than not bringing it, because in the alternative case, the child itself would not have been. The problem arises from the comparative worse off clause in our thinking. But we can recognize that bringing that child was bad for the child than in the alternative case in which she was not brought into existence. Quoting from Better Never to Have Been, for something to harm somebody, it might be sufficient that it be bad for that person on condition that the alternative would not have been bad. Then we come to Benatar's asymmetry, and here the article raises 5 objections. First, it claims, or rather erroneously claims, that Benatar's value assignment in his axiological asymmetry is impersonal, that is, from the perspective of the world. Benatar appears to assume that value is impersonal, and the absence of education, healthcare, opportunity, and well being for potential humans may reduce the quality of the world itself. In Still Better Never to Have Been, Benatar clarifies that this is not the case. He is not talking about impersonal view, but rather what is called as person affecting view. I'm not making an impersonal evaluation. I'm concerned instead with whether coming into existence is in the interests of the person who comes into existence, or whether it would have been better for that person if he had never been born. Another problem the article claims is that Benatar is projecting values onto non-existent persons, which is absurd. When Benatar claims that non-existent people benefit from avoiding suffering, the authors ask, for whom does this benefit exist? No non-existent person exists who can possess or enjoy such a benefit. But this is not true. Benatar is not claiming that non-existent people are somehow benefited. He's only claiming that existent people are harmed. Comparing somebody's existence with his non-existence is not to compare two possible conditions of that person. Rather, it is to compare his existence with an alternative state of affairs in which he does not exist. Third problem is that Benatar treats existence as intrinsically harmful. The article says that this is not really the case. Even though there are harms in life, there are pleasures too, and they may not always be alleviation of some kinds of pain. Pleasure is not merely the absence of pain, but a genuine positive experience that can independently increase the quality of life. Well, how many pleasures are like that really? How many pleasures can be enjoyed without prior deprivation or as a remediation of deprivation? From basic pleasures like satisfying thirst or hunger to higher order activities which can give meaning to life, like completion of a large scale project, for example, you ought to be deprived of something for you to be able to enjoy that. Very few surprise pleasures come walking to us, if at all. Secondly, prior to the procreative act, who is deprived of those pleasures to start with? As for the criticism of existence being inherently harmful, you can imagine some existence which is devoid of all suffering and only pure pleasure. You can only imagine, because such a thing is not possible in real world. But even if you imagine such an existence, why would we care about it? Does it really matter that such an existence is there rather than not, given that in the alternative scenario, there would be no one who would be deprived of that pure pleasure? Again, from Better Never to Have Been, about such an existence, I say that it is neither a harm nor a benefit, and we should be indifferent between such an existence and never existing. But no lives are like this. All lives contain some bad. The article also criticizes Benatar for putting women in danger. Benatar's position has troubling implications for women. His view undermines women's reproductive autonomy and suggests that childbirth, breastfeeding, and motherhood primarily produce harm. I don't think Benatar criticizes motherhood in itself of being harmful. Motherhood starts after the child has come into existence. Benatar is for preventing the child's existence itself, but once it has come into existence, Benatar is all for a good upbringing, which includes good motherhood. Finally, the article accuses Benatar's view of suffering from a bias that is opposite of optimism bias. Benatar's argument appears influenced by a negative bias, the human tendency to give greater weight to negative experiences than positive ones. I don't see how this is the case. Most of Benatar's writing about anti-natalism has been analytical, well cited, well qualified, includes ample positive aspects. Benatar is a pessimist philosopher, but I can't see how his arguments are biased. To point our optimism bias in our thinking does not make one having a pessimism bias automatically. And then the article briefly touches on environmental aspects as well as demographic points of view of population explosion. I don't know if I missed some important points which got lost in translation, or if the article was indeed such a poor criticism. At any rate, things like these keep us on toes and ready for anti-natalist arguments. Another article from Iran in Philosophical Meditations, a critical analysis of David Benatar's asymmetry argument in support of anti-natalism, criticizes David Benatar's axiological asymmetry. Going by the abstract, the paper points to 5 problems in asymmetry argument. 1. The distinction between harm and benefit is unjustified. 2. Alternative explanations with greater explanatory power are available. 3. proving the immorality of procreation requires a separate argument that is absent in Benatar's reasoning. 4. Judging procreation must also take into account other human values such as human dignity and the meaning of life. And 5. Benatar's argument relies on ethical utilitarianism, which is not necessarily the best moral theory. Unfortunately, I could not download the full version, so all I know is only this much. We will revisit this if I ever get a full copy of this article. Going from Iran in the Middle East to Far Eastern countries, International Conference for Advancement of Artificial Intelligence on Web and Social Media was held in Los Angeles, California. Most of the topics were related to technology and its impacts, but there was one paper which talked about discourses on childbirth and parenthood in popular social media platforms across China, Japan, and South Korea, presented by authors from the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. This is more of an empirical paper than a philosophical one, but it has some interesting data points. Using large language models, the authors analyzed more than 219,000 comments on more than 600 short videos related to fertility and parenthood. The videos were on TikTok and the Chinese equivalent called Douyin. The data collected was from 3 low fertility rate countries: South Korea, Japan, and China. The researchers asked 3 main questions. What topics do viewers discuss when watching childbirth or parenthood related short videos? How do the short video contents influence the discussions about childbirth and parenthood? What regional specific socio-economic factors shape those discussions about childbirth and parenthood? In finding answers to these questions, they classified the data on 5 themes. 1. The child rearing cost. This would be the expense of having and raising children, uncertain economic future, the unaccounted domestic labor, which is generally done by women, the cost of providing public support like part of your taxes, which would be used to fund schools or children's facilities and so on, and the cost you have to pay just to protect your child from the world. The second aspect was what you get out after paying these costs, which is the utility of having children. This is the emotional reward that you get from having children, the old age support, as well as larger social support for the economy and society. Then there are values which have conflicting aspects in these countries. On the one hand is individualism, which considers individual as the most important unit versus the values which consider family as the most fundamental unit of society. Gender equality and roles also play an important part in decision making about having children. Biological health provides another set of conflicting values. On the one hand, there are assisted reproductive technologies like IVF, but at the same time, there are fears of the process of going through pregnancy and childbirth, as well as the risks of miscarriage or having to go through an abortion. Finally, the population structure is dictated by low fertility, demands to care elderly people, the dynamics of maintaining appropriate quality and quantity of labor force, and certain governmental interventions to promote or discourage having children. Based on these themes, the data was analyzed in all 3 countries. These pie charts show the distribution of these themes when it comes to videos about childbearing and parenthood. More than half of comments from China were concerned with values, which was mainly the conflict between individualism and family or society. In Japan, child rearing cost versus the utility of having children was most commented, whereas utility took more than half of comments in South Korea. This map shows distribution of anti-natalist sentiments in Japan, South Korea, and regions within China. Both Japan and South Korea are light pink, indicating less opposition to anti-natalist sentiments in comparison to some darker regions in China. Note that these are not philosophical anti-natalism points, but just the sentiments against having children. These charts show the types of videos produced in each of the countries. The videos are classified in 4 categories. 1. Individuals sharing personal views or experiences. 2. Bystanders commenting on others' views or experiences. 3. Experts like government officers or family scholars. And 4. Official mainstream media. The blue bars show the videos that were against reproduction, whereas yellow ones are the videos for reproduction. In all cases, the videos against reproduction exceeded those for reproduction. What is surprising is the large share of videos from experts and mainstream media against reproduction in all 3 countries. This was surprising as well as encouraging for an anti-natalist. On to some notable videos, and I'm going to start with a selfish one here. Mionski Theatre has released much awaited animation film on anti-natalism called Childspiracy. It involves a therapist, a climate scientist of Indian origin, apparently, a honking Englishman, vegan donuts, Santa Claus, and includes voices of Nimrod, Lawrence, and me, as well as that of creators of the animation. I mean it in literal sense. We actually dubbed for the characters. The film is very well scripted, has good flow, asks important questions without going too technical in philosophical jargon. Literally, even a child can understand it and enjoy it at the same time. The protagonist, who is a therapist herself, is challenged to find an unselfish reason to have children. Will she be able to find such a reason? To know that, watch the video. Link in the description. Lawrence made a research video about Samuel Beckett, the iconic Irish French playwright. Lawrence goes through some of his plays, including Waiting for Godot, Beckett's philosophical pessimism, quotes from his characters indicating antinatalist ideas, his own antinatalist quotes, and his friendship with Emile Sharon, and so on. This was a well researched video, and it shows the effort that he had to take because Beckett's work is so vast and deep. So, thanks to Lawrence for digging out another antinatalist from the past. There was a pro natalist discussion on a channel called Doha Debates. Is having children a moral obligation? The whole discussion was 2 hours 26 minutes long, but a condensed version of about 46 minutes was uploaded on Al Jazeera's English channel. There were four guests: Stephen Shaw, who is the director of the documentary Birth Camp and a former data scientist; Laurie DeRose, who is a senior fellow at the Institute of Family Studies; Alka Basu, who is professor of global development at Cornell University; and Antonio Lewandowski, a feminist activist and researcher. I called it a pro-natalist discussion because most of it was brainstorming about what we can do about the declining fertility rates. Things like what should young people do so that they can have children? What should their neighborhood do to support raising them? What should the society do at large? And what should the governments do? How should marriage be seen in the light of having children? And so on. Crucially, in all of this, what was missing was the perspective of children. Would children be harmed or benefited from being brought here? The only exception was when Alka Basu touched on this slightly.
And surveys show that women who want to be childless or child free, whatever you want to call it, a part of it is actually concerned about bringing children into the kind of world we have created, whether it's a physical world or the ideological world or the violence filled world. I mean, I really fear for my children who are now grown up, but even now I keep thinking that when I'm dead and I'm not there to protect them, what will happen is such an uncertain, unpredictable world. And with young children, it's even worse. I mean, when you think so, you can be genuinely altruistic from the point of view of the next generation by not wanting children. So I think there are so many reasons for not wanting having children. So this two children is in an ideal world, but as you face the unpredictability and the tensions of the current world, many people want to step back and think that, do I want to bring a child into this, and do I want to leave a child to fend for himself in this kind of world once I'm gone?